It is summer and maybe you are traveling, or maybe you just want to travel without leaving your couch. Well, in both cases, this video is for you. Because in this video I will be sharing my top picks for books that absolutely make you feel like you're traveling the world. From rugged landscapes to bustling cities, these books will make sure that you feel like you're on an adventure. So, grab your passport and let's embark on a literary journey together. Now, as always, I will be linking all of the books I talk about down below in the description, so you can do your own research. And let's start our travels, why not, in Paris. Paris is the city of love and the city of literature. Paris and France, after the First World War, became an absolute magnet for all kinds of poets and authors and playwrights, for the simple reason that the liberal censorship laws made that in Paris you could print almost anything. Now add to that Paris had a bustling nightlife. You could sell hard liquor anywhere in the city, you had all kinds of nightclubs, and negotiable love was very available. It's not hard to see why many writers would want to be in Paris. Now the roaring 20s passed and Second World War came and lots of things were forgotten. Cut to the late 1950s. The management of the Parisian Ritz Hotel found that there were two huge steamer trunks still in storage for decades now. So they contacted the owner and urged him to come and collect them. And that owner was Ernest Hemingway. And inside of the steamer trunks were his notes, his diaries, his thoughts that will make the book a movable feast. And the Moveable Feast is just that. It reads like a diary of the time that Ernest Hemingway was actually living in France, in Paris. And the unique thing about this book is that for once we do not see the adventurous and bolsterous Ernest Hemingway that we all think we know, but we get to see a man who just enjoys his days in Paris. He enjoys his cup of coffee on a cafe in the morning, he enjoys his cigarette on a balcony looking over the streets. But it is still Ernest Hemingway, of course. So throughout his days, throughout his stories, his diary entries, we get to meet all of those famous people. F. Scott Fitzgerald, there is Fort Madox Ford, we get to visit places like Shakespeare's Company, the bookstore, and all of these iconic Ernest Hemingway linked places in the city all of a sudden become real on the page. Now what I especially love about my copy is that it also comes with black and white photography. So you can actually see the places he's describing, see the people he's meeting. It is absolutely lovely. Yes, there have been written many books about Paris already. But what a Moveable Feast gets so right is just the atmosphere. If you really want to feel like you're wandering the streets of Paris, like you're having a cafe on a terrace and overlooking the passers-by, commenting on them, if you want to have a feel of that everyday life you can get in the city of love and literature, then this is an absolute must-read for you. So let's kick this literary journey off in the city of Paris with A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. For our second destination, we will go a lot more exotic. We will cruise down along the Nile, we will visit British India, we will visit Baghdad, we will visit a lot of very exotic places. But don't worry, because we have an excellent guide. His name is Sir Richard Francis Burton. He's a 19th century British naval officer, and he is quite a character. And this is Iliya Troyanov's The Collector of Worlds. This book is the fictionalized account of Sir Richard Francis Burton's life. Now, Sir Richard Francis Burton was quite a figure. He was a British officer, but he possessed one singular and rare ability. He had a talent to assimilate with other cultures. He spoke more than 20 languages and he translated foreign works like 1001 Nights, like the Kama Sutra, into English. Later in his life, he is the first Westerner who manages to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and he will go on in his life to write many travel books from there. He's an officer of the British Army, he's a translator, he's a writer, he's an adventurer, and this is his story. And this is where this novel gets it right. It is a very layered novel. On one hand, you can read it like an adventure novel, and you can read about all of those stunning places that Sir Richard Francis Burton will visit. It will sweep you away and take you to those stunning landscapes, and reading through this book is like traveling with Sir Richard Francis Burton. But on the other hand, the POV switches to all of those people around the explorer. His guide, his scribe, people who are carrying his luggage, and you get a whole different story. A story about colonialism, about West versus East, about cultures clashing. It is a very unique book that always seems to shift, like it was quicksand itself, and you can read it in many, many ways. It will absolutely scratch that itch of a wanderlust you have, or maybe even worsen it. While at the same time it will prove to be thought-provoking, and it will explore the underbelly of colonialism. It is historical fiction with a tad of the truth. If you love reading about exotic destinations and desert landscapes, then this is absolutely the book for you. Do give it a try, The Collector of Worlds by Iliya Troyanow. Now, I'm not one for heat myself, so let's cool down a bit and let's go for a nice walk in the woods with Bill Bryson. Now, if you have read any of the travel books by Bill Bryson, you will know that he is one of the most entertaining and funniest guides that you can ever have. And in this book, he takes us on a walk, on a tour of the Appalachian Trail throughout the Americas. And this book is the closest to a hike that you can come without leaving the comfort of your armchair. It will explore majestic mountain ranges, it will take you to quiet, very old forests, it will have you swim in pristine lakes. It will also introduce you to a lot of people you will meet on the journey, and yes, perhaps a few bears as well. And it is a charming book. I mean, Bill Bryson is an expert at mixing things that are informative, the true non-fiction book, with his very witty, amusing, funny way of delivering little tidbits and little anecdotes and things that happen and most often go wrong. And he actually takes you along the whole journey, from planning his journey, having to go out and buy all of this camping equipment, all the way up to getting there and starting to walk the trail. And as he finally starts hiking the trail, he will meet fellow hikers. There's this one woman, one girl, I think her name was Mary Ellen, and they start talking, and it is absolutely hilarious. But woven all through this amusing story, there are these little informative tidbits. There is some history, there's some geography, there's some biology that you can find, and he delivers it in such a way that learning becomes fun. And if you do love a laugh, then I highly advise this as an audiobook as well, because having some of those jokes delivered audibly just has you chuckling out loud. A lovely little travelogue for all fans of hiking and walking and going out camping, and even those who prefer to stay at home. A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. Now, if we are talking about authors and traveling, then we have to talk about Agatha Christie. Now, Miss Christie herself was quite well traveled. In 1922, she undertook a 10-month tour all around the world. From Europe to South Africa, all the way on to Australia, all the way back through Hawaii, up to Canada and the United States and back. But that wasn't all. During her second marriage, when she was married to an archaeologist, she accompanied her husband on his many digs all the way up down in Africa. She got to know Northern Africa and the Middle East, and she absolutely loved it. And it shows in her books. So let us allow Miss Christie to be our guide on a lovely cruise on the Nile. And yes, there might be a murder. Yes, Death on the Nile is an iconic Hercule Poirot story, one of the best known and a fan favorite. But, hear me out. If you have already read this book, then do go in for a second reread. And this time, look at all of the details about the country, the landscape, the river. Once you take all of the humbug about the murder out of the picture, you can see that Agatha Christie is actually describing this beautiful landscape, these beautiful surroundings that she must have seen herself. This is not the kind of description that you can find from someone who's just sat at a desk somewhere in the British countryside and imagines how Africa must look like. No, this is the work of a woman who was well traveled and probably was looking over a ship's rail at the landscape, just passing by slowly and taking notes. And especially Death on the Nile is, in my opinion, ideal for this. In most Agatha Christie books, we jump into the murder, into the crime right away. In the first few chapters, we have met all of the characters that are important to the story. There is our detective and there is our murder, and there we go. But not in Death on the Nile. In Death on the Nile, the pacing is much slower, almost like a cruise ship just cruising by. She takes her time to describe all of the surroundings, all of the characters, the landscape, everything there is to see and experience on the ship before she goes into the murder. And it makes for an excellent and beautiful book. And if you have grown tired of the descriptions and the landscape and Northern Africa, don't worry, this is still an Agatha Christie book. There will be murder, there will be backstabbing, jealousy, love affairs, you name it, this book has it. There is a reason why this book is still a fan favorite today, so if you haven't read it already, then go out and pick up a copy. And if you have, then do give it a reread and pay special attention to the landscape and the descriptions. Because Miss Christie knew what she was talking about. Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. Now the next book is far from a fictional story. When I first read this book, I remember I was flabbergasted. This is such an incredible, unbelievable story that it will absolutely cause you to read page after page after page without stopping. This book is Into the Wild by John Krakauer. This is the true story about an American youngster, Chris McCandless, who in 1992 decides that having read Jack London, Kerouac, all of these adventure travel books, that he's going to pursue the same path. He abandons everything. He takes the license plates of his car, he breaks all ties with his family, he cuts all of his credit cards in half, and he abandons it all just to go on the trail and explore the wilderness. The problem is, despite all of his preparation, all of his study into the matter of surviving out there, this is going to prove a bit of an ordeal. Yes, he sought to live that nomadic lifestyle, he even renamed himself to Mr. Supertramp, and then he disappears. No one knows where he is, and the search starts. Now soon his car is found, and with his car all of his worldly possessions. He even left behind his maps and just walked into the Alaskan wilderness. And the whole story, the whole search goes on and on until they finally find his body in an abandoned bus, which he used as a shelter, where he must have died of starvation. Now this, of course, makes the news, and there is this reporter, John Krakauer, who writes a story about him, but having to do so under a very tight deadline, he thinks there is much more to do with this story. There is much more to find within this strange character of Mr. Supertramp, so he decides to write a full book of it, and this is this book. And in this book he tries to recreate the whole journey and whatever happened to Mr. Supertramp, but he also delves deep into the thought process behind it, because it had become an obsession for Chris McCandless. He left behind desperate parents, a desperate sister, begging him not to go, but he still did, and it makes for an incredible story. It is a page-turner, it is unbelievable, it will have you glued to your seat, it is mind-blowing, really. At the fact that the circumstances around McCandless' death are not entirely clear, and there are many theories, conspiracy or other, about what happened to the young man. And this makes, of course, for an added layer of mystery surrounding the whole book. And in the end, it leaves you with an intriguing question, because it would be easy to say that this was an enormous tragedy, but at the other time, this was a young man living his life to the fullest and in the way that he absolutely wanted. So is it better to live a long life or a fulfilling one? Into the Wild by John Krakauer. Now our next hike is much closer to home for me, it is much safer, but it will prove to be equally emotionally distressing. We are going to walk the coastal path from Devon to Somerset in the UK, and we are joined by an elderly couple. Raynor and Moth are going to join us on the Salt Path. Now, the Salt Path by Raynor Winn is again a non-fiction book that absolutely reads like fiction. The book picks up at that point where our author, Raynor Winn, finds out that her husband Moth, to whom she is married over 30 years now, is terminally ill. And everything around them simply crumbles. Their home is taken away, their livelihood is taken away, there are hospital bills to be paid, and time is ticking. They have nothing left, and what can only be described as either a bout of insanity or some divine insight, they decide to just start living again, and they are going to walk this 630 something miles all around the Great Britain coast, the Salt Path, and just live and camp on the way. They have almost no money left to buy food. Their only shelter are little tents and anything they can carry in their backpacks along the way. And it's a tramp's life. And yet it is such a beautiful journey. Because as they start journeying, as they start walking, they have lost everything. They start connecting again with each other. And you can see how they come to peace with the news that Moth is going to die with his disease. It is a story about grief, about mourning, but also about healing and how nature and our surroundings can do that for us. And this is not a book about travel, but it is a book about a journey. A journey through a rugged landscape which is beautifully described with wind-swept coasts and animals and plants, and you can almost taste the salt of the sea on your tongue as you're reading it. But on the other hand, it is also a journey of our couple as humans, as people who are in their mid-age, who had everything, and now have lost everything, and they have to rebuild with what little time they have left. And yes, it is an absolute cliche, but they don't have much left, but they still have each other. And the love that these two people have for each other is an absolute foundation from where they start building again. They believe in each other, they support in each other, and it is such a powerful story. And it is absolutely a story about what it is to be human. It is about perseverance, especially for Moth, when the doctors tell him you have this terminal brain disease and the best you can do is just take things very steadily, very slowly, and he decides, no, sod it, I'm going out and go from this lifelong walk. But also when they are now homeless and they look a bit shabby, they are eating like those cheapest things that they can find, and people start to treat them differently. They start to actually see them as homeless, they start to shun him, give them dirty looks. It is both the best side and the worst side of being a human. Again, and this seems to become a theme today in this video, it is a non-fiction book that is absolutely written like it was prose, and it is very lyrical and beautiful and absolutely worth reading. The Salt Path by Raynor Winn will prove to be quite a journey. The next one, a very short one, absolutely delivers what it says on the tin. This book is Poems for Travelers by Gaby Morgan, and it is indeed that. Poems for Travelers is a part of the Macmillan's library collection. It is a sweet little book. It is a collection of all kinds of poems that are written by and for travelers. And there is something for everyone. There are poems for die-hard travelers, there are poems for dreamers who dream about traveling the world one day, there are poems for those who only go out on the weekends, and there are even poems for those who refuse to leave their house. There is Walt Whitman, there are some poems by Keats, Rossetti, and it does what poetry does best. It inspires, it makes you dream, it makes you fantasize about faraway destinations, about what could be and possibly might never be. It reminds you of where you want to go and where you've been. And as an added bonus, like I said, it is part of the Macmillan's Collector's Library. So it is a beautiful little book, pocket size. You can take it anywhere. It has the typical gold foiled edges. It has those little ribbons that you can use to mark your favorite poems. It is just such a lovely little book to have. If you love poetry, if you love travel, what else is there to say? Poems for Travelers by Gaby Morgan. Now our next journey, our next travel takes us all the way east up to Japan. And this time our guide is a bit of a strange one. His name is Nana and he's a cat. In the Traveling Cat Chronicles we meet the cat Nana and his owner Satoru. And both of them are going on a bit of a journey, a bit of a road trip throughout Japan. Now the reason why they do this is not very clear at the beginning, but who cares? Nana is a cat, he can roll with the punches and easily adapt. After all, he has been a stray cat for many years of his life, so he knows how to survive. And at this point we get like two different layers, two different stories. We have all of the destinations and the people they visit, all kinds of old friends and family that they have not seen for years. And through the stories of these people they visit, you daisy chain almost the entire overarching story about Satoru and his cat Nana. And on the other hand, you get this beautiful story about traveling to Japan. From the bustling city streets all the way up to the beautiful mountain ranges in Hokkaido, they go to the beach, and at each destination, at each place they stop, you get a beautiful description of the landscape, how it must be to travel there, what you can see, what you can do, and all that through the eyes of a cat. It is a beautiful journey and it is a beautiful story. Especially towards the end of the book, when all of these seemingly separate stories start to slot together and you can see the outline of what is going on and what the overarching story is, and then it all suddenly clicks and it will leave you emotionally devastated. It is a book about friendship, but also grief and loss. It is a book about the beauty of our surroundings and finding happiness in the little things. And again, if you're an audiobook lover, then do check out the audiobook version of this one, because the voice of Nana the cat is ever so well done. It is posh, it is condescending, it looks down on you, like cats do. I had a great time with this book. It is one of my favorites I read this year already, and I absolutely recommend this one. It is equally beautiful and devastating. It is the Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. And just when you think we're back home again, there is one absolute classic that I could not leave out of this list. We find ourselves in a gentleman's club in London where there is a bet going on. There is this certain gentleman who claims that he can travel the world and do so in 80 days. Let's meet up with Phileas Fogg and his French servant Passepartout and travel the world in 80 days with Jules Verne. I mean, do I even have to introduce this book to you? It is the quintessential adventure and travel novel that we all know and love. It will take us all around the world, from the industrious Americas, the Wild West, all the way up to Africa, India. It will take us on journeys on trains and boats and even hot air balloons. It is absolute adventure, it is exotic, it is thrilling, and it is a joy to read. Around the World in 80 Days is an absolute evergreen. It brings that sense of adventure that we all secretly love to read. It has some of the most remarkable and entertaining characters that Jules Verne ever wrote. There is this ever British stiff upper lip gentleman Phileas Fogg, and then there is this nervous French servant Passepartout who tries to keep Fogg out of trouble but always fails. There are quite the plethora of characters that they meet on their journeys, and it is an absolute joy to read. And there is nothing to take serious about this book. This book is pure entertainment. It is not meant as a geography book. It is not meant as a critique on society. No, it is pure and sheer entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially not when we're on holidays. Around the World in 80 Days has always been one of my favorite Jules Verne books, and I think the reason for that is, on the one hand, he excels as always in his beautiful descriptions, his very detailed atmosphere he can conjure up, and you actually believe you're in Africa or in India or in the Wild West. But on the other hand, what this book has going for it is the time constraint, the 80 days, the having to catch the next boat, having to make sure you're on the next train, and this continual race and everything that gets in the way of it. It makes you actually hold your breath and cheer for the characters when they finally manage to get on the train or the boat and even make it back to London. And what can I say? It never gets stale. It still hooks me after all of those years. So yeah, I'm going to stop ranting and perhaps even reread Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Now, if you have made it this far in the video, let me tell you two things. First of all, thank you very much. You're an absolute trooper. And secondly, you'll forgive me that I slip in some philosophy now. As our last book for today, we are going to revisit one of my all-time favorite modern philosophers, Alain Botton, and his book, The Art of Travel. Now, in The Art of Travel, the question about travel has been turned on us. Instead of wondering where we're going to travel, this book asks us why and how we travel. And it makes for some very interesting thinking. And this book showcases what I absolutely love about Alain de Botton most. It takes these little almost vignette styles, these little snippets of questions, of thought-provoking citations, and it interweaves them with classical thinkers, with historical events and facts, and it becomes this mixture of very interesting non-fiction and very thought-provoking ideas that you just have to close the book for and think about a while. He looks at some of history's very known people. There's Flaubert, there's Van Gogh, there's the famous biologist Alexander Humboldt, and he looks at how they traveled and why they traveled. Why did Van Gogh always go back to the Provence in France? What insanity absolutely drove Alexander Humboldt to travel the world and try to explore all of these new lands and species? And throughout all of these historical travel accounts, Alain de Botton looks at his own travels, and in the end it all becomes almost like a question to you, the reader, the traveler. How do you travel? Why do you travel? And it becomes almost like this introspection about your own behavior, about your own prejudices when you're abroad, and about your own almost cultural luggage that you have in that backpack. Back in the day when I was still teaching classes about culture clash and the meeting of culture, this was always one of the books that I would absolutely recommend to my students, because it very much illustrates how culture clash works. Why do we feel anxiety when we are traveling? Why do we feel afraid when things suddenly are different from us? This book invites you to think about travel, how we travel, and how we meet with other cultures, and I can only absolutely recommend it. And yes, I have some critiques about this book as well. It is very Western oriented. All of the examples, all of the philosophers and thinkers that he takes parts from are absolutely Western dominated. And yes, it is a male dominated book, and I would have loved to see more female voices in this book as well. But despite from that, this book is still worth it. Absolutely. If you love Alain de Botton, if you love to be challenged to think about your own behavior and about how we do things, and especially how we travel, then this is absolutely the book for you. When I have to explain philosophy books, it never makes sense, but hey, trust me, this one is worth picking up. The Art of Travel by Alain de Botton. I've taken you on a journey throughout the world through 10 books, and now I want you to do the same. Are you traveling this summer, and if so, where are you traveling, and do you have this ultimate travel book that you love to revisit? Let me know down below in the comments and we'll talk traveling through books some more. Thank you for watching. As always, it means the world to me. Do like, do subscribe, do comment. Now, if you have a long flight ahead of you, or you're simply staying at home and you want something to read, then that's easy. All you have to do is find more recommendations in this video.